Oh, here's Alex. So we have, we're 1, 2, 3, 4. I think we need,
There's only three of us, right? You guys are not on
one online,
voting. Alex is a.
or is she, she's ex officio as well?
Yes.
Oh, here's Paul, so.
That should be. We're just saying, Mo and Justin.
Yeah, I think, actually, yeah, Justin told me.
You have.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, he's not, yeah, Justin's not available.
Okay.
So. Thank
You start?
So we just needed 4?
Yes, because there are.
Is there 7 official members or what was
I
that?
think so, so 4 would
Yeah,
be
there's
fine.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 members, there's 7 positions, only 6 members right now, and you have 4 in the room, so you have a quorum.
Okay,
I call to order the June 10th meeting of the Mobility Planning and Coordination Committee. Just to do a roll call vote. We have, James Goldstein,
Here,
Duncan Allen. Here. Paul Molter.
Here.
Shane Mark.
Here.
And Tyler Gabrielski.
here,
First order,
so,
and, Alex. Please.
Here,
Hi. First, item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from May 22nd. And did everyone have a chance to review? Any discussion? Comments? Entertain a motion to approve the,
motion to approve.
and, we'll take a roll call vote. James,
Yes,
Duncan? Yes. Paul?
Yes.
And chair votes aye. And so the next item would be the update on Dedham Ave and Webster Street. Oh,
One question,
go ahead.
old business,
Okay.
is it, I would just mention if this is the appropriate time to do it, that with regard to that West Roxbury contact we got. I did talk to Mr. Keane about it, he gave him a pretty thorough briefing. He's gonna get back to me and sort of suggest what he thinks the next step might be. I think he's inclined to find some kind of format to have a conversation with them, but that remains to be seen. Also, as a piece of information I sent to both Mr. Keane and the came out last week, the advisory board's operating budgets committee recommendation, which is interesting in terms of what some of the numbers that they're looking at are, which might make you think twice about perhaps building another big project, but yeah, just so I think they're fully informed. I just am anticipating. I will check back to Mr. Keane probably sometime this week to see if he had any thoughts.
Thank you. And then, so the update on the Dedham Ave and Webster Street projects?
yeah, so, Dedham Avenue's, the curb and sidewalk work is nearing completion. We're still resolving we got our permit for the work under the bridge from the MBTA, which is big because we were not sure when, if ever, we were gonna get that permit. The only issue is that there are insurance thresholds that are beyond the town's default policy. So we have to go and get externally insured for railroad protective liability insurance. And it's a little pricey, but it's really more working out the sort of administrative kinks in terms of the contractor won't be the signatory on the contract, the town will, but we have to make our insurance coverage match the thresholds, which are a little bit below the contractor would have, but we can't piece together multiple policies, it has to be one entity, so that's what's going on with that. The contractor is going to be working, or has already started working, in a neighborhood, off of Great Plain Avenue. So the window for us to, after they finish that neighborhood over there, they'll, after the 4th of July, they'll be working on Webster Street, finishing up the job over there. So we have until that project, that work is completed to get everything lined up to finish over here, because once that's completed, they're gonna be moving on to the next.
Another question, I don't know exactly what the work scope involves, but is there any likelihood that town or contractor personnel will actually be in the rail right of way?
On top of that grade with the tracks. Yeah,
On or within 5 feet of the tracks?
no, it's, their definition is within 50 feet of the right of way, regardless of what grade you're at. So,
So they definitely will be there.
so they would, so that's why we're getting the insurance, obviously.
There's also Keolis has safety requirements training for people that are actually gonna be in the right of way.
Yeah, so there won't be any. All the work will be contained below the bridge. Below.
Okay.
Yeah. It's basically limited to excavation, so there, the MBTA is. As a matter, as it's, not surprising that they would be concerned when you're excavating near a bridge abutment that they own, right? That's the main concern.
Nobody's gonna kind of.
Nobody's-
On top of the
nobody's gonna-
trestle to look down. at something
No.
or whatever.
No, nobody's gonna be going up there, they're not permitted to do that.
And they wouldn't. We couldn't ask them to do that work themselves, like they don't have, they have the capacity to just do the sidewalk and. Themselves and like, we can just wipe our hands of it.
They are not interested in doing projects that will benefit the constituent towns as much as they care about their own infrastructure, their own service. I think it'll be, the fact that we have the permit that was the biggest hurdle, because we couldn't do anything. Now that we have the permit, we sort out the insurance, we have a little bit of time. As long as the contractor's still in town, they'll be able to come over and take care of it. It's not a big, because it's a small piece of work compared to everything else they've been doing here. So they're nearly done with the sidewalk and the curb installation on on this western half of the corridor. And our traffic signal electrical contractor starting this week will be installing the the upgraded pedestrian signals, traffic camera or traffic detection cameras at the Webster at Dedham intersection. So the majority, the vast majority of the project from a curb and sidewalk perspective will be completed probably by the end of this week. Then we still have the paving component to it. But that's a little bit, there's not as many details involved. That our crew will prep the roadway in-house, and we're working out if we want to use a polymer modified mix. That's what supposedly makes the pavement more durable, or, it's been shown to make the pavement more durable, but it's also, there's some current concerns that it'll be a little bit harder for us to mold and work with, and it's more expensive, so MassDOT is kind of trying to, is insisting that we use it, so that's something that we're working out, but tomorrow I'm going to be taking a trip to Raynham because they used that same kind of asphalt mix on in a similar context in Raynham. So I'll be looking at it tomorrow. See what it's, how it performs, what it looks like, and then we'll go from there. So those are kind of the two sticking points on the Dedham project. And then Webster Street, as I mentioned, we're holding off on completing the work until after the 4th of July holiday. We don't want any conflict with the 4th of July parade or anything like that. So they have plenty of work to do in the meantime in the residential neighborhoods. But right now we are working through some details with drainage on that project. But we have everything else, planned and set up for the raised crosswalks to go in. We had some, select board member had some questions about the project last week, working with him to kind of provide all the information and catch him up to speed, and we had some design modifications, a month or two ago that we're incorporating into how it's going to be laid out in the field. And we'll be sending out another wave of notices to inform people as to what tweaks we made to the design in response to their comments at the neighborhood meeting a few months ago.
Can you remind us of the extent of the repaving? Is it the entire Dedham Street?
So it starts at Lincoln Street,
Mm-hmm.
up by the municipal lots over on Lincoln
Yeah.
and Chestnut lot, and then all the way down to the bridge down here.
And how about Webster? Is that being repaved as well? Or is that the Eversource thing?
It's being repaved as, so Eversource did work on that stretch, and they've given us money to, as part of the project, and paving it will be part of the scope, so.
And that's when roughly, has that been scheduled or?
So with the sidewalk, because it has to go sequentially, so we'll have the raised crosswalks done in a what's called like a binder course, so they'll put like a sort of initial layer to form it up. And then the pavement contractor will, the paving contractor will come in probably mid-July.
So over the summer, this will be done.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay,
and
I
then
was just
so then they'll come back to finish the finish forming the raised crosswalk and do the detail on it. And then the pavement markings, the paint contractor will be in shortly thereafter and put the signs up. And that'll be that, so.
This is like all in July, like after the 4th, that's all coming in the paving.
Yeah, so it'll probably, because you can kind of expect like a week or two between each stage. So they'll come in, they'll build the road, then a week later, they'll come in and adjust all the drainage castings and things like that. So probably it'll take us through the whole month of August, a month of July, and then probably the first week or two of August.
The sidewalks on Dedham Ave, are they 5 feet wide, you know?
They
new
are the
ones.
ones we're putting in, yeah.
Yeah, is that new for like sidewalk construction here? They're normal, they seem a little bit wider than the normal, like a 4-foot sidewalk seems like in every other neighborhood. And so these seem wide, they're more comfortable, they're good, but they seem wider, like, is that?
We can make them more narrow. if we got-
Yeah, no, I like the 5-foot sidewalk, so should that be standard?
Yeah,
Like
we're trying
forward.
to go with the 60-inch, which is 5 feet, of course, wide sidewalk in the infrastructure where the right of way allows us to.
Yeah.
But you are correct, most of the sidewalks we have here are anywhere from 48 to. Actually, I'm sorry, they're like 4 foot. So,
It's not always consistent.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
not always consistent, they're about 4.5 feet depending, so we're going up to the 60 inches,
Yeah.
5 feet.
The side, both of them were redone, I can see it like the old, when it meets the old one, it's, it's a good amount, but it's much more comfortable.
Yeah.
To walk, and when I walk with my kids, like that is 5 feet, it's much better than 4 feet, so. I think like going forward, we talk about sidewalks. Like, will that be, is that already a standard, like, is that, do we even need to talk about that, is it?
It's our, as long as the right of way allows us, of course, it's gonna be if we have enough width between if there's a curb. And the back edge of the right of way, or if it's an uncurved street. Between the street and the back edge of the right of way, so.
Sometimes there's enough burn, sometimes there isn't.
It all kind of depends on where that street ends and where the property begins, the private property begins, and of course. Most of our streets here, like we've talked about before, were set along old cow paths, so we're kind of coming in and trying to. Put
Yeah.
it where we can, but by standard, if we can fit a 60-inch sidewalk, we will, if not, it's because we don't have the width to do it without moving the curb and everything else, which creates a much larger scale project.
The wider the sidewalk is, usually the more adjustments we'll have to make on the back end if people have walkways and. So like on this project, we had a couple properties where, we had to go into their walkway so that the walkway wouldn't. You wouldn't have a big step to go up onto the sidewalk. We try to like make it so that it's nice and level.
And in many cases, it's reclaiming our right of way. If you look right at Webster here on the, what is that, the southeast corner?
Yeah,
Where you can see the granite curbs on the back of the sidewalk as well. So the property owner there, the corner had assumed that they owned all that land, and when we did the survey, they didn't, so. We notified them, they pulled their plantings out, and then we reclaimed our right of way there to get a wider sidewalk there, and the signals on there, put curbing at the back end.
yeah. So a lot of times we're going into areas that have inconsistent widths. Potentially not clearly demarcated. Property line versus the right of way. But yeah, to answer your question, yes, that is the standard, as long as we can fit it. So yeah, I would say that, Dedham Avenue is like a step in front of Webster Street, but because of these other like details that we have to work out, they'll probably both be done right around the same time.
You're still planning on striping a bike lane on one side of Dedham Ave?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, that was something we had to, we kind of had to work, work with because we had utility pole conflicts. But we figured out a design that works, where they could accommodate that. There was points at which we weren't sure we were gonna be able to make it work, but we ultimately figured it out.
Okay.
Especially without that, infrastructure on Webster Street. Wanna make sure we included it.
Alright, and then, good, any other comments? Okay, so we'll move on, item number 3, the NPCC role in DPW street project planning. What should our standard policies be? Lane width, sidewalks, bike lanes, traffic calming. When do we add them to projects and are we gonna wait until our street design guide is done before we start implementing some standards?
And that third, I think, is the most interesting topic in a way. Because I think those 4 other areas you mentioned, lane width and traffic calming in particular, I think are fairly strongly correlated with street classification, whereas policies or ideas relative to bike lanes and sidewalks are a little more, sort of universal and somewhat independent of functional classification. Yeah, I don't think it's what this are tightly linked. I think ultimately, yeah, they have to fit into a cohesive pattern, and the end product would have policies with respect to those features pretty well developed for each classification that we have. So it's kind of a chicken and egg thing there.
In the scoping that we talked about last time, maybe I'm wrong, but I thought most of those would be included in the scope of the, work that MAPC is doing, and therefore it may be somewhat chicken and egg, but I think there is a starting point, which is that document, as opposed to us independently. It
Yeah,
seems-
I mean, I guess I hadn't seen us sort of saying, you know, anything over 20 feet in width needs a sidewalk right now. And similarly, you know, anything that you can see, you know, over some other width, you know, or I mean, over a certain volume has to have a bike lane. I mean, it's just kind of, and bike facilities are so variant. And I've grown up, you know, with the different widths to fit into different contexts. That I find it hard to sort of have an agenda going in to that process. I guess that's another way of saying it.
So I guess I would say that the scope for our next scope is like in 2 years, right? Maybe
Yeah.
two, maybe. I think that's a-
So we have it so that the scope should be completed in September. And then we'll have to procure the consultants. And then the consultants will be working on it for however many months. So the way that the schedule is lined up now, we should be actively working, or they should be actively working on it as we're planning next year's projects. I will say that next year's projects will not. We have some budgetary constraints as compared to the last few years, so it'll be more, we won't have quite as big of a scope of maintenance work and repaving, and it'll be more project based. We'll be doing intersections specific areas, more similar to like the Dedham Avenue, Webster Street projects rather than we have our paving list of 10 or 12 locations that we're going to. Because we have about half of our allocation this coming fiscal year as we did the previous year.
So a question that will inform the answer to this question about do we wait for you and perhaps Shane? Are there significant projects in the next year or year and a half, that's the end point of the work following the scope, that would benefit from some, maybe not firm policies, but guidance from this group, even though it would be prior to the actual design guide?
Yeah, so the biggest project that this body will have an influence on will be the Highland Ave project. We should have our first design submittal to the state before the end of the year. At that point is when the design process really gets started in terms of like picking options, public feedback, all that kind of thing.
If I can interrupt for a second, because I'm not as well informed as I should be. Can you very broadly, in just a sentence or two, describe the Highland Avenue project? Because I mean, it's been going on for, I don't know, a couple of years already.
Yeah,
And I'm assuming it's that project that you're talking about.
yes,
But I thought most of the decisions about design were already made because they're under construction and they're doing a lot.
The different section.
different part of Highland
Ah,
Avenue.
So that's what
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
unclear about.
Sorry, I should have been
No,
more
no,
specific.
I'm just not up to speed.
Yeah, so we're talking from Webster Street
Ah.
south into town.
Oh, okay, okay.
So basically the corridor between, Great Plain Avenue.
Yep.
All the way up to Webster Street.
Yep.
The primary
All the way up Webster to Highland, as I was saying. Oh, no, along Highland.
along Highland to
Yeah,
Webster,
yeah.
yeah, and then everything beyond Webster, that's the state's project.
Right, okay,
But in
thanks.
this case, because we are doing it through the TIP project process,
Mhm.
there's a lot of requirements that we have to meet with the state and a very long design horizon.
Mhm, mhm.
I have seen, and we have seen sort of concepts. I think it was like last year, but they're going to be making a 10% design submission
I see.
this fall,
Okay,
or somewhere thereabouts. So, and that 10% is largely comprised of, sort of doing the homework on how do the existing intersections function? How would, any given improvement or change in lanes or anything like that, how would that affect the traffic in the intersections? So they're not at the stage where they're vetting, okay, let's put a bike lane here or not, or,
that's what I was getting towards. I mean,
Yeah.
if this is the appropriate time to weigh in on a bike lane, for example, which I think is the likely route from the extended rail trail to Webster and the community way, then I think we should weigh in and encourage them to include a bike lane.
yeah,
Um,
so.
but maybe it's already there, we don't have to worry about it, I'm unaware of the
Yeah,
status.
so I'll tell you that on the preliminary concepts that I've seen, bike infrastructure is one of the primary
Okay.
considerations. In fact, they're trying to, determine if a continuous bike lane is implemented, how does that have to fit into the existing context in order to make sure that it's continuous, consistent? Which is not always as easy as just kind of paint a lane along the
no,
length of the
it's-
road, because there's, the right of way is not consistent in width, there's some areas that there's tree conflicts, et cetera.
Yep.
So that's one of the biggest, parts of vetting the
I
design.
mean, one is curious with respect to on-street parking, that's part of it.
Absolutely, yeah, parking will be part of it. So it's gonna be basically the single biggest project that we're working on. And it's really gonna get started in earnest once we make that initial submission, because then we have what's called like over the shoulder meeting with MassDOT. Where they kind of, they have more control over the design because the state is giving us this money.
Yeah.
So they have a lot of sort of built-in processes for, how do you add design elements and vet them through the public process, through engineering, everything like that.
Yeah.
So that's what I think, so that'll be kind of the single biggest area, and then also the downtown. When the Great Plain Avenue, the design process will also really get underway. Towards August, September. So those will kind of take up the majority of this committee's focus and the majority of that would be the opportunity for input. Both of those projects, bike lanes are a primary component.
Right.
And actually, it's because we're planning on doing that we felt that we could, we did not have to include the bike lanes in the Webster Street design. The way that we're going to be constructing it does not preclude bike lanes to be added later. But there will be that north-south arterial with some level of bike lane infrastructure and probably protection. So,
Yeah, so when there's, I mean, if there's any need or opportunity for this committee to support that, weigh in on that, you'll let us know.
it'll be very, there'll be a lot of involvement with this committee. But I guess what the question is if we don't have the design guide finished, or, we don't quite have it available for us to use as a evaluation tool by next summer, are we going to then we're talking the next time that it can really influence construction decisions would be the next season. So, which is fine,
Yeah,
But I think it's important for the committee to understand that, again, we're looking at complete streets concepts on every project that we do. And fitting in complete streets concepts when we can and where we can, so. A great example is Webster, so when we with Webster, we don't have a design guide, but with Webster, when we took the vision to the consultants, we said we want to include the complete streets elements. And when we had the meeting with the community, we had proposed 11-foot lanes. The community pushed back and said, hey, we think 10-foot lane is appropriate, so we compromised at a 10.5-foot lane. Also the raised crosswalks. So the raised tables for the crosswalks, the bump out, so there's many complete streets elements.
Yeah.
So I just want to stress to the committee that even though this design guide may be a year and a half out, that doesn't mean that we're not already incorporating these things into the projects that we're working on in between now and when the design guide becomes official for us. And of course, we'll continue to bring these projects and update the committee as we're working on
But I
the
think,
projects.
I think with respect to potential linkage, though. Bike lanes and or bike facilities in the case of both Webster and Highland are very much the kind of thing that a street plan, should be addressing.
Yes.
And, the questions of, through bike, performance and level of service versus the fact that one of them has a whole bunch of, businesses proximate there, which Webster doesn't. I guess the sort of thing is complete streets kind of such a overwhelming principle that you would necessarily consider having lanes on both of those nearby parallel streets.
I think, I think that, the residents who spoke for 10-foot lanes, I think there's a conversation about narrow lanes being safer. So I was surprised that like at a neighborhood meeting that they would come forward and say, we want 10-foot lanes. And so can we make a standard that all of our reconstruction projects start with 10-foot lanes? And then if it needs to be wider, like that can be justified, like somehow, like engineering justifies 10.5-foot lanes, or they justify 11-foot lanes, and it's on that, and there's, stuff like that.
Yeah, so not, one important thing to note is that, not every repaving or resurfacing project. Or most of them even, are not on roads that currently have lane markings. Beyond maybe a center line, so. Yes,
10-foot lanes with, existing lane markings, right? If we are reconstructing a road or renovating a road and restriping it, right? One that was striped
Yeah,
before that has a 15 or an 18-foot lane that.
Yep.
By default, when the line goes down, it's 10 feet on either side, unless someone else says something. I don't know how.
Yeah.
Like between now and when the design guide comes out, that might say like, oh, every street's gonna be 10 feet. Is there like a policy that we can start or talk to somebody? Or-
Yeah, I think looking at the vision of 10 feet, it's not a bad idea. I think the one thing we don't want to do is strap ourselves into where we say everything is going to be 10 feet, because some of the roadways are going to be dependent upon the ADTs for the roadway. Like, for example, under MassDOT's guidelines, if there's a certain amount of traffic on the roadway, then they want a certain lane width. And then that's when we can come back to them and say, no, we want a smaller lane, but by default, they're gonna say they want a larger lane because, or a wider lane because of the volume of traffic. So it's that give and take.
Yeah,
And then the other thing is, like, for Webster, for example, when the neighborhood said 10 feet, we had proposed 11. We compromised at the 10.5. We didn't feel comfortable going to 10 feet because we're not changing the curb line of Webster. We're keeping the existing curb line. And as everybody knows, if you use Webster, all the truck traffic, delivery drivers, UPS, everything is figured to avoid that north-south on Highland. We could go in Webster and make it a faster trip. So what we didn't want to do is now create a 10-foot lane that consistently UPS trucks and everything else is already going over the center line, because we've narrowed it to a point to where they can't fit in that.
but they're.
So we compromised at the 10.5 feet for that section there, so.
But they're using the lane now because those lanes are 15 feet.
Exactly,
So they're
yeah.
using it now because it's comfortable to drive a truck
Yeah,
down.
absolutely.
Lanes are 15 feet wide.
Yeah. But that's, so I think it's gonna be, I think that's a great viewpoint to look at, is say, hey. You know, our default should be looking at, can we make this, can we safely make it a 10-foot width? And if so, then yes, if not, then okay, what's the next?
Well, can
10
we
and a
start-
half or 11?
Can it be? It starts at 10, and if we don't think it can be safe at 10, then
Yeah,
we have to justify.
Yeah, yeah.
11, you know, like,
yeah, so I think it's fair to say that. For all of the projects that are in this context where we have. The lines already down and we have an opportunity to change where the lines are gonna go. Personally, I would start from lane narrowing as a default position. How extreme that is, or how, you know, how significant the change is kind of context dependent, but I don't think we're in an era where we're putting everything back just the way we found it. Because it's so difficult for us to go to areas that we're not already planning to go to, that every project is potentially our only opportunity for the next few years, right? So I think we start with that. In areas where there aren't lines, like earlier this, or I guess it was last year, earlier this year, there was a pilot suggested on Warren Street where we were going to be piloting lane narrowing there. And that would have required us to paint a center line, and we had a lot of organizing against that. So we want to make sure that if we do choose to go in that direction, that I think that that's one of the areas in which the street design guide will help us. But in terms of the project by project. Yeah, we don't have a standards sort of a default. We've just been kind of ad hoc, like saying, okay. We've been wanting to do this to see how effective it is at calming traffic. Is this an appropriate location? If so, design consultant or in-house engineers, can we incorporate this into the design?
I have the sense that these issues are being looked at. I guess I'm a little wary of, particularly in advance of having this document out there, sort of making sort of interim default arrangements. I mean, I'm satisfied that
Yeah,
the issues are being looked at this
Yeah.
point.
and I'm hearing that there are a lot of exceptions likely to the 10 feet, and so I share your, I don't know what you want to call it, but hesitancy
Yeah.
to,
But I think fundamentally, I agree with what you're saying, Tim, is that the narrower the lane, the more calming effect it has on traffic. But again, I think the street design guide is what's really gonna help us with that, because as that helps define the functionality of the roadways, whether they're residential, arterials, or collectors, then of course, those lane widths would follow based upon what type of function that road serves as a standard, if that makes sense. So
Right.
hey, if you're on an arterial, then the standard lane width will be a whatever that ends up being, based upon the classifications or the function of the roadway that the design guide provides
And
to us.
and ultimately, whether a particular roadway is in one class or not, will also be something that's
Yeah,
determined.
you know, most of our residential streets, we don't have pavement markings on. Right now, we're really looking at our collectors and our arterials, so. You know, those are your centrals, your GPAs, your, some others. I see Karis has her
I
hand
was gonna
up
say,
too.
I have to say green now, but, okay. Yeah, it's-
So I just wanted to add, I guess, two different things. So the first is that I believe the Traffic Safety Committee is doing a pilot of 9-foot lanes on High Rock and on Oak Street. So we should have some before and after data on both of those projects to sort of see like real life implementation and what the effect is on speeds and traffic calming. And then just the second thing, particularly when we're talking about streets like Highland or Webster, being conscious that if we do want to make sure that our complete streets policy is written so that it's multimodal, which means that it accommodates all users, and trucks are also considered users, because we need to get delivery items to people's homes, or, you know, the businesses need to get their larger deliveries on a periodic basis. And so I think the concern is always you want to make sure that you're not accidentally pulling those particular vehicles into neighborhood streets where there aren't any striping plans, I think has been indicated. So I think there's like the balance to figure out. And I know when we've talked to the state about this, particularly about the Highland Ave tip project, that the state itself is really of two different minds. So I think they have a default in their engineering department of 11 feet, but they also have a fairly robust complete streets group where they're sort of trying to figure out internally these issues as well. So I think that design guide will be really helpful in helping us identify what users should be on the road. And my guess is that Highland Ave will be a road that we would want truck traffic to be on. So we just have to make sure that those roads are clearly identified. So that way we're not accidentally diverting them into neighborhoods as well. So it's a balance between traffic calming and accommodating all users.
Yeah. Just to go back for a moment, Duncan had an interesting question, and now that Karis is here, she may also want to weigh in on this about I mean, I know that the Webster design is done and the project's underway and stuff, but it seems that there's an implicit decision that the north-south bike link will be on Highland. And yet, given the last comment about truck traffic and so forth, which obviously makes sense on Highland, trucks and bikes are not great together. And I think you mentioned, Tyler, that the Webster project doesn't preclude a bike lane, but it's not included now. Can either of you say anything more about that? Because I mean, any bike connection is terrific. But one on Webster, if it could be accommodated, to me seems much safer than on Highland and preferable for a variety of reasons. But
Sure. I can follow up just sort of two things. So one is that the state requires that if you have 10,000 trips per day on a road, that you have to have a separated bike lane of some type. So whatever we do on Highland will either be separated by stanchions, raised bike path. You know, in fact, one of the small areas on Highland that we have a little bit of a disagreement with MassDOT, or we're going to have to figure out maybe about trying to figure out how to work with the abutters, is that small section of a really residential type neighborhood between the library and the Heights, because that is heavily treed. And in order to implement what the standards of MassDOT would require a significant tree removal, which I don't think anyone would really like to see happen. So I guess what I'm saying is that if we were to do Webster correctly, as far as having a good, safe bike accommodation, a separated bike accommodation would be the appropriate method. Right now, this is really a topical approach for a project. It's not really a renovation. It's simply a repaving project that we're taking advantage of having a blacktop and restriping it and striping it to a way that we find to be more traffic calming, with a couple little pilot items that have been added in specifically around the high school. So that doesn't also mean that we wouldn't do potentially a larger renovation of Webster Street in the future, looking at moving the curb line, which I think is what you'd really need to do in order to accommodate a bike lane. Because one of the issues with Webster Street is it's an inconsistent width, and you can't fit a bike lane in the entirety of the road. It would go from being a legal, or what we would consider a legal bike lane, to just a shoulder in varying parts. So I think there's sort of like two different categories, and maybe that's worthwhile to sort of look at. We have the time and place. We have a good set of circumstances to do traffic calming measures on a road, right? So Webster, Dedham Ave, these are projects that are really not full renovation projects. They're really road surfacing projects that have elements of complete streets in them, really in a pavement pilot kind of method. And then we have these really big projects like Mark Tree, Great Plain Ave, or Highland that are really full renovation projects that I think, you know, you're talking about major changes to that right of way. So I think it would be maybe helpful for, you know, when we get this design guide to have some ideas of like, we have an opportunity like we did with the Dedham Ave, and MassDOT's giving us some funds, like we know exactly what to implement, and maybe we don't have to engage a designer as extensively as we have in that particular project. And then we have the like long-term planning for the community side of things, which is really more about putting in that like intense bike infrastructure as opposed to just like painting on a bike lane, and really thinking about curb lines, traffic calming features, things that would actually change the entire user experience of the road versus paint and other more temporary treatments that we can use.
That's really helpful, thanks.
Yeah, I think Karis hit the nail on the head there. There's two kind of two buckets here.
Yeah.
The Highland Ave project is basically like you trade some control over the project's elements for the funding and the technical expertise that you get from the state. So it's our single biggest opportunity for some really world-class like infrastructure. Versus us trying to work within predetermined budgets, adding it after the fact. One thing I will say about Webster Street as well is there was some thinking about weighing the raised, the traffic, the vertical traffic calming elements, the raised crosswalks against the desire for the bike lanes. The sort of decision that was made was we'll prioritize the pedestrian infrastructure first. And then when another opportunity arises. So I know that on Webster Street, there's already some talk about further Eversource work. There could be another opportunity in a few years. We can keep the raised crosswalks and make them compatible with bike infrastructure by including basically their more gradual elevation. The width of the bike lane can go on either side. But that's something that could be added later. As you don't want to cut a path through your raised crosswalk. So it was, so there'll be more shots in the future, and that when it's more in the bucket of, okay, this is like a project that we've got a specific allocation at town meeting for this project, we can kind of build out, the scope can be more ambitious. That's what's really gonna help us put together the separated lanes or whatever is necessary to really make them, not just kind of throw-ins to a project.
And it's also gonna allow us to test some things in paint that we could potentially do. Later, for example, as we're in a community meeting, the thought was that if we slow the traffic down at the high school, the approach in the end would be speed. Because people are frustrated, so they're gonna try to make it that time, so we went back to the drawing board and became more aggressive with our pavement markings. So for example, the shoulder, as you're headed northbound, the shoulder will go down from like 4 feet to one section to almost 2.5, 3 feet. But we're doing that because we're gonna put torpedo islands in paint as opposed to the center line, torpedo islands in paint. So narrow it down, so that way, as you're going through that corridor, you're always kind of on your toes on what's coming up to keep the car slow. But if those torpedo islands work like we think they will in paint, that doesn't mean we can't come back later and take that exact paint and now make it curved. And make it a granite curved torpedo island, so it's also giving us some opportunity to test some of these items in paint before we implement it in concrete or in granite curving.
So I think overall, the timing of our construction schedule plays into this pretty heavily, because if the committee was where it is now, when these projects were being planned, there probably would have been more informed discussion and input at that point in time. But we weren't quite set up until things kind of got a little bit baked in for this year. So like I said, next year will be more kind of, won't be as many projects.
So, yeah, I think I had talked to Tyler a little bit about the paving list that was presented in front of the select board last week or 2 weeks ago. And out of those streets that are under renovation, there were maybe like 4 or 5 of them that would have been good candidates for some bike infrastructure. They were all over 30 feet wide. They all already had, most of them had markings on them already. So like, when does that list of, I know we've talked about it before, I think Harrison said, like, you don't know what's gonna happen. We don't wanna release the names of the streets that are gonna be renovated like too early because things change, right? I think that was discussed before. Like, when does that happen so that we can talk of like, without a design, without some sort of guide or standard, we'll renovate the roads. Miss some opportunities, I think, to add, even if it's just paint, just allocating the space. And a lot of times it's just narrowing a lane and adding a shoulder and a stencil. It can set that side of space for that, the space aside for later, if you want like a full reconstruction of it, but, like when. How can we get that moving so that when those projects come up and there's an opportunity that makes sense to put a bike lane in there, like how does that? How can we get that moving,
Yeah,
like that needle moving here? Because yes, we have huge, big, very big projects, the downtown and Highland Ave. The Dedham Ave, those are all really big projects, but there are a lot of small reconstructions where we're doing the pavement and we're coming in and we're striping and it's a really low hanging fruit to like, can we just add something here?
I think Kara says her hand up there, Mr. Chair.
Yep. So, what I would say is we have it, I believe, in the charter that in the fall, when we put our capital plan together, that we will be presenting at another joint meeting like we did, in the spring. And the idea is to get feedback on our capital plan before we submit it. So I think that's maybe like the first opportunity to really have those conversations. And I would say one of the other things that would be helpful, and I think this comes from the design guide, is getting clarity on when we even have striping and when we don't have striping, because I think Tyler referenced a specific neighborhood that the traffic safety committee had put together a recommendation to paint lanes because it was a traffic calming. The perception of that neighborhood was that that paint would make people go faster, not slower. And they were extremely upset about a potential, like they had concerns about their property values. They had a lot of fears. So I think having a standardized guide would be really helpful, because then we'll know like, oh, this type of road that's been designated this way has paint on it, and this type of road that's been designated this way doesn't. And so I think that would, looking at all the projects in September, I think for this particular year will give us kind of that one-off conversation. And then hopefully by the time we get to the second round of our capital planning through this committee process, we'll be able to look at that design guide and have a much easier time fitting in, like, oh, we just know that this type of road gets this type of treatment. We don't have to have the one-off conversations about like whether or not, because Tyler has William Street on its paving plan, should we put striping down on William Street or not put striping down on William Street? And we'll have a pretty good idea of, based on that guide, like what that striping should look like. And then I think it's more of a conversation of, do we have to make a change because of specific circumstances about that road? Or is it just a standard road treatment? Just like right now, Tyler has a standard road treatment. When a road gets to a certain degradation, he knows he needs to pave it, or they know they need to do a surface treatment. It would be the same sort of like road process where we would know, oh, we're going in and renovating this type of road, and this is a treatment. And I should just say, because like we use the word sometimes interchangeably, to us, like a renovation is when we pulverize the road and reconstruct the entire road. So that would be like what happened on Highland Ave, what we're proposing to do in Mark Tree, what we're proposing to do on Great Plain, versus what most of what we do are surface treatments. And those, they're, typically the budgets are much smaller. It's about pavement preservation, and we're not usually talking about making major changes to the right of way as far as the permanent infrastructure. But obviously there's a lot of opportunity to make changes as far as markings and other sort of temporary measures that we can put into place.
And I think just going along with that, Kara says, again, the design guide is really what's gonna help that, because that's also gonna drive us with submitting our budget for what we need. Like we were just having a conversation today of, we're upgrading all the ramps in the Alden neighborhood right across from Olin College. And what we're seeing now is the budget that we have for ramps, the actual work is coming in much higher than what we had budgeted for it. Because the ramps aren't, again, they're not all standard ramps, so. One corner is completely different from the next corner. It's not like you just take a template and say, this is what all four corners are gonna look like. And we're also taking advantage of one of the areas at Alden and Brewster that's. Like what, 35, 40 foot wide right now? And we're gonna square up that intersection some more, remove a lot of pavement. Bring the curb line out, put granite curbing in there and add green space for stormwater, so. I say all that because I think this design guide is gonna help set those standards on what we do on what function of roadways. And then that's gonna help us to put our budgets together. Because as we start to implement these things and these design standards, it's going to be more than what we're currently budgeted for in our typical roads program, so. It's again, kind of are we putting the cart before the horse on some of these things, or are we looking at these concepts, implementing what we can now until we get this design guide, which will help us with the standards plus the budgeting for those roadways as we build our capital program out.
Yeah, one more thing I wanna mention on that related, so currently the way that this, our budgets and our pavement preservation program is designed. We have to resurface X number of lane miles on our network per year to keep the network at a certain, well, pavements, pavement rating essentially, right? If we don't do that number each year, the network as a whole degrades in condition. If, and I want to do it, so don't get me wrong, if we start to invest more in any given location, that may mean, probably will mean that our list cannot be quite as long. We're gonna have to be more judicial about where the resources are gonna be allocated on a location by location basis. But we still have the obligation to the town to make sure that that overall number is staying the same or trending upwards. And we're not losing track, because the more ground you lose, the more money you gotta pour into it to bring it back up to where it needs to be. So the way that the system is built and our program is built is we get a certain allocation of funds, assuming that everything goes as planned through our infrastructure capital article every year. That allocation is calculated by saying, this is the number of lane miles we have to pave every year to maintain the system score. And this is the, X miles of sidewalk that we can accommodate in a year, from a capacity standpoint. It's not sort of a open bucket for however much work we can get done in any given year. There's some math behind it. If we're, for instance, the Alden at Brewster intersection, that was an opportunity for us to reduce a lot of open pavement, make an area that is not complying with ADA standards, much more accessible, a lot more attractive to use other modes and walking and such. Doing that intersection meant that we most likely have to push off one of the projects at the end of our list until we have the funding to get to that. So it's already happening this season. We've because when we go through or doing these projects, we want to make sure that we build in enough capacity into our budget where we can get that X number of lane miles done so that we're not losing ground, but we still have enough funds to make these more substantial improvements when we have the opportunity. So it may be that we have to kind of rejigger our strategy for how we request funding, using other sort of supplementary articles for specific purposes, like paying for ramp compliance out of a separate budget, rather than sort of lumping it in with the resurfacing that we do. Or putting bike infrastructure under its own umbrella and having that funded separately. So that we're not mixing our funds and then kind of sacrificing, robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of thing where. We spend all of our money towards the beginning of the season and then we're like, well, we had planned to do some of this work, but. We decided to put a bike lane here, we decided to make some more substantial pedestrian infrastructure improvements here. So now the roads that we had in our plan that really need, from a condition standpoint, need a Band-Aid. We're not gonna be able to get to them till next year, so it's balancing. act.
Just out of curiosity, what is X? How many lane miles approximately does the town have to do every year to maintain that rating?
I think it's 17.
17? I just didn't have an order of magnitude.
Yeah.
I saw Karis, I'm not sure, Mr. Chair, if she took her hand down and put it back up or if it's still.
Anything to add, Karis, or you just put your hand down?
Nope, just I guess, forgot to put my hand down. But yeah, 17 is what we have in our budget.
Yeah,
And then one thing I'd say just for the committee too, just that Alden, Brewster neighborhood, we do have cones and everything set up to simulate what it's gonna look like to give people a visual, so. Just, if you wanna, again, I keep saying, we're implementing these things on our projects because we believe in this as DPW. Feel free if you're in that neighborhood to cruise by there and you'll kind of see, you'll see the existing curb line and the existing roadway, how wide it is. And you'll see the grabber cones and the paint that will give you a visual of what it's gonna look like once we
Yeah.
implement this.
and there's another intersection that's similar situation that we'll be planning for the start of next season. So that's something that we can bring to you all and show you what our thinking is, and you'll have some opportunity to see the different concepts we have for that, so. These intersection treatments are gonna become more and more common as we go. Because it's really where the work follows. There's an opportunity to make an improvement where we might not be able to again for another 8 to 10 years, so. There's, we have to kind of. Reorient the program towards strictly. Either reorient the program or build some supplementary things into it to support. Some of these extra improvements that we want to make in accordance with our complete streets and all that kind of thing.
Just want to clarify that I'm not suggesting that we stripe streets that aren't already striped.
Yeah.
But if we're renovating a road that already has stripes and there's a blank canvas, that is when you go in with some sort of standard to put something there. That was, that's the low hanging fruit. That's where you can, the cost is lower than coming back in later and trying to erase something and repaint it a different way.
And just along that line, stay with those 2 or 3 streets that you said you think we missed some opportunities with, if you wanna kick those to Tyler, they haven't been done yet, so. If we pay them and we restripe them, we could look at to see if we can,
Well, so.
if we could do something with the
Because if it's-
striping. I mean, we're not saying
I know,
aggressive,
yeah,
but
sure,
we
sure.
we could look to see if we can narrow the lane width on those streets, but. As long as it's not something that's gonna need to go to design, because that design takes a while, but. We're certainly willing to look at those 2 or 3 streets that you have in mind.
Harrisette has a striping plan for its bike lane that exists, it's existed for a long time, but that one doesn't have paint on it now, though. Just,
Yeah, not in the case of Harris, but maybe in some other places. There's also the question of like, residents might have feelings about some of these changes, how much or how little do we take that into account directly, versus. Sort of drawing lines on the page and saying,
there's some parking spaces that have to be removed.
yeah, cause once you get that involved, there's always.
There's more involved than just restriping it, but there should be. Because these roads they're all like 32 feet wide, 30 feet wide, there should be like, is there a checklist that's like. We should put bikes here, like it doesn't work because X, because we don't wanna talk to, because the neighbors might not like it, or. We can't lose any of the permanent parking spaces or.
Again, you're bringing up some great points, but I keep pointing to that design guide, because I think that design guide is exactly what we need to go through as we're looking at these to say, okay, boom, here, we know, this is what it says. And then that's gonna be that coverage for us as, for the committee and for DPW as we do these things and we're having neighborhood meetings to say, no, this is our standard.
Right.
Like right now, we're having these meetings and we're bringing an 80 to 90% concept design to the neighbors, and then a lot of the neighborhood meetings are wanting to design on the fly. And they're saying, well, you've already committed to this. This is a done deal. And we're saying, yeah, it's a done deal, but we can tweak some things.
Right.
And so
Right.
this is gonna help give us justification of the methodology of why we do the things. that
Right,
we
and
do.
we're not doing projects because we think that people might be upset. It's more like if we're going to go in that direction, there needs to be enough time for us to work it through the process, do public education, show them that this works or that doesn't work. It's not that we're not gonna try, it's just we need enough time.
Yeah, that's one thing we're big advocates on is, we haven't done such a great job on it in the past, but we're really committed to getting out in front of things and notifying the neighborhoods and letting them know what we're going to do and why we're doing it as opposed to we just drop a leaflet and then 3 days later we show up with construction
Yeah.
equipment and we change the perceived features of the street,
Right.
so.
I certainly think it's necessary and the right way to go, but I'm smiling because it makes me think, I forget how long ago, but in the Bloomberg administration, I think it was. That they had a transportation planner, a woman, you may know her, who overnight. They did bike infrastructure on purpose without notifying anybody because it was the only way
Nicole
to do
Friedman.
it. What?
Nicole Friedman.
No, this is New York.
New York.
It was Kadick, or Caddick, anyway, it worked actually.
Yeah.
Because they just did it, but it, cause in New York, you can't get anything done, and it was amazing, but I'm not advocating that at all, but.
There's
It was
a
funny.
strategy.
Yeah.
That we have to be aware.
No,
of.
no, you're going about it appropriately in my view.
Yeah, so I think it's just the timing of the year kind of. We started thinking, or started talking about these things sort of towards the end of that cycle, rather than. Like Karis was saying, in the fall, when we're sort of wrapping up our budget, in the winter, when we're making tweaks to any designs that we're working on. So.
Okay.
But I think that having philosophically, we have a default, but we're not necessarily putting a number. You know,
Move on to the next item here. Development of a sidewalk maintenance plan removal pilot.
Yeah.
yeah, easy one,
Is
easy one to finish it up.
there a discussion on that? Does anyone have an opinion?
So all I'll say on that is, I think we should start to talk about it, because. Almost daily, I get calls, requests, emails to. The sidewalk in my neighborhood is garbage, it's falling apart. What why aren't you fixing it? And I have to tell them, if there's a hazard, you can report it and we'll get to it in-house. But we don't have a program to. We don't have a program and we don't have the funding to support a program for. Wide, a larger scale neighborhood. Wide rehabilitation. So what's been floated is a program that involves in some way. Removal of the sidewalk on one side of the street. These are in low volume resident, not a huge amount of pedestrian traffic. Removal of sidewalk on one side of the street and rehabilitation of the other side. The mechanics of which streets we decide, to what extent are the residents involved in that process, both before we've picked, while we've picked, and while we're constructing. And then how does that sort of work on a year-to-year basis? Those are all things, so it's a problem.
And does anyone need a refresher on how we've approached the sidewalks? Or is everyone?
Well, I recall you have that very lengthy list.
Yeah, so we targeted really safe route to school sidewalks near the schools, to get kids to schools. And then on the arterials, on the main lines,
Right.
well, that's coming to an end. We're almost done with that work, so now we're moving into the neighborhoods. And the issue is right now, Karis, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a 40-year backlog on sidewalks that we have.
That was with the old ramp number, so it's probably more than that now, but basically, if you look at our funding of getting $600,000 or $700,000 a year, and that gets you about a half a mile of sidewalk, and we have 120 plus miles of sidewalk, the math is that's how long it will take to maintain. So that's why we've had a policy of trying to hold to the same mileage of sidewalk, because we already have an unsustainable volume. And the idea of trying to create greater interconnection while potentially reducing some of the inventory would be beneficial, because even if we were to get like a quick infusion of cash now, you're still having this problem because sidewalk doesn't last 40 or 50 years.
And then just along with that, the other thing that we've been, this conversation is very appropriate since August of last year is, of course, sidewalks are impervious surface and leads to stormwater runoff into the system. So by removing sidewalks strategically, we're going to have more areas to allow the stormwater to percolate and thus hopefully lessen the demand on our system that we have during these high intensity, short duration rain events. So just looking at these sidewalks, what we really want to do with this is develop a standard by, okay, what neighborhoods do we go into? And what side of the street, like what things are we gonna look at to determine what side of the street the sidewalk belongs on? And then looking at the removals, we've all kinds of ideas, but that's one thing that we really would like this committee to focus on, is so that we can get this in place, so that as we start this, because right now the thing that Karis has to answer for, I have to answer for, Tyler has to answer for, is why are you doing it in this neighborhood as opposed to, our street needs it as well, or our neighborhood needs it, so doing it in such a way that it makes sense and that we could justify why we're targeting the areas that we're targeting.
Yeah, so the initial kernel of thought was that we have this huge list. If you and your neighbors can sign on to this idea that yes, you're gonna get your sidewalk rehabilitated, but in exchange, we're going to be taking it out on the side that's less constructible. You can sort of skip to the front of the line. That's kind of the initial thought, but that's about as far as we got.
Can I ask, are there other communities that you've looked at that have done this, and what lessons have they learned, either in a good way or the hard way?
Yeah, and I'm gonna defer to Karis, because I know that this is kind of, I think Franklin, am I correct in saying that, Karis?
Yeah, Franklin has done a lot of that. They're a huge subdivision community, so they have like a ton of cul-de-sacs, for example. So they did a lot of pavement removal in those cul-de-sacs. I think the challenges that we sort of talked about are whether or not the people who are still there when those neighborhoods were built, but a lot of those houses were built by developers. The town at the time had part of its planning regulations that it required sidewalk on both sides of the roads, including in cul-de-sacs. So the developer paid to put in those sidewalks in the first place that we'd potentially be removing. So I think that's been one of the concerns. And I imagine it's also very similar to like our sidewalk plowing routes. It's very funny. People who we do plow seem to get very upset that we plow, and the people on the opposite side of the street that we don't plow seem to get very upset that we don't plow them. So trying to figure out like the right side of the road. And I think largely like when we've talked about it, trying to do the side of the road that has the least number of obstructions. So the ones where you have you want to preserve more trees, you want to not have to deal with the utility and move a lot of utility poles, because that can be expensive and tricky. That likely will be where the paths are, but I think it's figuring out the mechanism by which we start the process. I think that's sort of been one of the items that hold us back.
I mean, I don't know any of, any other communities, that's why I asked the question, but it seems to me if there are, beyond Franklin, which seems quite different with all the cul-de-sacs and stuff, because we have very few here as far as I know. But getting lessons from elsewhere may help in this prioritization and justification effort. Because it's, otherwise, it's very, very challenging.
I know that some communities have betterment programs, and that's how they handle.
Yeah, I think, I could talk to that a little bit, but I think Paul wanted to.
Is there a way to create? Cause it sounds like there's this tension between. The residents who think they know what they want, or they think they know what is better, and sort of. Data that shows what we should be doing. Is there a way to create like when you're evaluating two potential sides, just create this like scorecard, right? So that it becomes this. Objective measure, and you assign scores to utility poles, trees, permeability, and then. You grade each side, right? You assign each side a score, and you're like, this is, and then if you've got. People saying, why did you do this side, this is what the scorecard. Shows. I don't know, is there like a way to take out, I mean, I think, again, what you're sort of saying is like. And I guess I sort of fall more on the side of like, I'd rather on certain things related to infrastructure. Do it and ask for forgiveness later. If we know that it's being done from a data-driven perspective versus a person who's concerned about like the whatever irrational, potentially irrational thought or justification they have in their mind on something. And so as much as we can make things objective and sort of say, you know, sorry, like this is what the data shows, this is what the numbers show, and how we do it. I don't know.
But I mean, there's value in putting some facts on the table. But that group can also get really, really complicated. I mean, I think about, you know, the number of school children crossing the street. Is it better to get them all on the school side as soon as possible? Or is it better to collect them on the other side and get them the process, you know, signalized and then protected crossing? And you wind up doing a lot of math that may not land you anywhere. I mean, the most interesting notion I've heard is basically just if you can get people to talk to each other, so have an opinion, you know, what might be, you know, maybe you could list those factors and say, these are things that go into it. And, you know, it's not cheap to relocate utilities and, you know, you've got some, you know, drainage or structural issues that make a difference as to what the. And sometimes I think just the mere fact that there is such a thing as maintenance. And the idea of, you know, come back and reconstruct it 10 years out. People don't think about that, so the annualized cost. And if we in fact are, as a town, overburdened by the amount of sidewalk we have. You know, it's this sort of, you know, maybe you need to do your part or something.
Maybe I'm missing something, but why are utility poles or anything like that even being talked about? If we're talking about removing sidewalk, why would you have to move utility?
I think it's just easier to replace one side, right? You just, the construction process.
So what we're looking at is if you went into a neighborhood and a lot of the neighborhoods, both sides need rehabilitated. So the decision is like factoring which side you remove the sidewalk.
Right.
Well, you'd probably want to remove the sidewalk where the utility poles are, where you've got like underground gas.
Right, I
The
get
gas
that.
is running there, trees, removing it on that side. Because it's easier to maintain
Right,
a side that has less obstructions than does a side that
Of course.
it's always gonna pop and crack and so.
so that was Paul's
Yeah.
suggestion too, somehow systematize that, but I thought you were all saying it's expensive to renovate because you have to move utility poles. That's not it at all. No, okay. One other comment though, it seems like if I understand this concept correctly, it's a step in the right direction, but probably a relatively small step. And this problem is 40+ years of backup. So, I mean, it seems to me that it's the funding issue, unfortunately, again, and this is well above my pay grade, understanding how DPW and the town funds this stuff, but, you know, doubling, tripling, quadrupling sidewalk funding, over a couple of decades may cut back, a few years of that backlog. But, going along at, what, 700,000 or whatever number you said, even if you were to remove, you said 120 miles of sidewalk, or something like that, 25 miles, I mean, it helps.
Yeah.
But you still have a huge, huge backlog.
Yeah.
And, other steps are gonna be necessary for sure, and other big steps.
Yeah, one thing worth mentioning too is it is the funding is definitely a big part of it, but also we could quadruple the budget tomorrow if there's only so much work that DPW staff can oversee, even if the contractor's doing it. We still need a inspector and oversight over what the
Absolutely.
contractors are doing. So it's I think that one of the main benefits, having a formalized program will help us with the funding in terms of figuring out exactly how much would be needed to fit into that vehicle. But it's also just a predictable cycle, putting something in a program where we can plan ahead. Okay, we're gonna need this much money this year, this much money the next year. And we can get it into a similar program like we've done with the pavement. Whereas right now, it's kind of like, okay, we're gonna give you X amount of dollars per year, do as much sidewalk as you can do with it. And like everyone has been saying, that is helpful for some areas, but it's not chipping away at that list. So
Yeah.
I think just having a program. And I think the sticking point is really not so much the constructability, which side. I think that's something that DPW can play a larger role in. It's more of the first step of where do we go?
Yeah.
And residents are gonna have to get behind some sort of deal like, yes, you want the sidewalk to be rehabilitated in your neighborhood. And we agree that it's in poor condition, but you'll have to agree to this removal. Not everybody in the neighborhood may agree, or there may be some other way that we select candidates and then
Yeah.
those areas are, we sort of solicit, their what they can get behind or not. We don't know if there's gonna be people rushing to the front of the line, or if everyone's gonna be like, oh, well, if you're gonna take out sidewalk, I don't know if it's gonna be my side or across the street. Because they're not deciding that, because that's what they're gonna want to decide is
Right.
which side, and obviously everyone's well, some people might not want it on their side, but a lot of people will, so.
That's what I was gonna ask, is it always viewed as a negative, because you would be giving people more yard in front, in a
Yeah.
sense? I mean, is that always
I
negative?
think there were one of the public comments at the recent select board meeting, right, about the other road with that they were a little bit concerned about getting a little bit of extra yard, right? That was his concern.
Yeah, cause well,
Brewster.
At Brewster, yeah, maybe that's a much bigger piece
Right.
of lawn, but that, I think.
They didn't
there's a
want it.
Concern that that's another thing.
To
to-
have
that
to
they have
take
to
care
cut the
of.
grass. or-
Yeah, I get it.
And the property line's not actually changing.
Right, so it's still town owned, but the property owner's probably gonna maintain it. then.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
What's the cost to leave an unrehabilitated sidewalk on one side and rehabilitate this one sidewalk on the other?
So
what's
it's the cost, like,
But why?
What's the
why-
downside of that?
Yeah, because you have to come in and you have to remove it, you have to remove the material, you have to put loam down, you have to seed it, you have to convince the residents. If they're already coming to you and you're saying, well, we're gonna put it on this side and remove it from your side, well, what if it's been put on that side and we leave yours in disrepair until the end of the list?
Yeah, I think
two things.
Sorry, go ahead, Tyler.
Two things, safety,
Yeah.
if we have an opportunity, we don't wanna leave infrastructure that we don't think is really safe. I mean, we're adjusting things with Band-Aids when we can, but, the other thing is like, if, say the one side is rehabilitated, and then years go by, the other one crumbles, and we're planning on going in and rehabilitating the other side again.
people will be like, what are you doing? This, we could, it would restart the whole thing all over again. So I think it's like by consolidating the assets, then there's no question as to where is the future investment going. That would be my,
Does DPW have a sense of how much is removable? Broadly, is it 10 miles, 50 miles? I mean, do you have any sense, given you don't want to do it in the more walking friendly neighborhoods, I guess, or I'm not sure how you were describing it, but
No, we've talked about doing of course, everything's contingent upon funding, but we've had a lot of conversations about sidewalks and doing, just like with our road program, a sidewalk inventory. With the condition,
Doesn't it?
it does, but looking at it and updating it to not only the inventory, we have the inventory, but is it compliance with cross slope? With ADA, because the one we currently have is mainly just our inventory where it is and a condition rating. So it's just a sidewalk inventory with where we have sidewalks and the condition. But it's not necessarily, doesn't meet the ADA requirements based upon cross slopes, based upon all the other things that we have to meet, so. We've talked about whether or not we should upgrade that. And then as we do that, throw in something where we can have some of those, that knowledge that you're asking about, James, is to say, okay. We know this neighborhood we've got sidewalks on both sides of this neighborhood, this side of the street is
yeah.
a 20.
yeah, so we
versus
don't have a
90.
list.
So, but no, we don't have a list now, but so we're looking at those kind of things, of how do we,
And is it
Have
too
the
risky
data.
to provide an example of a street or a neighborhood where there now is there are now 2 sidewalks and it's, it may not make sense.
Karis has mentioned in the past, I think Edgewater Drive.
Yeah.
Paris just put her
That's
hand.
kind of an obvious one because it's disconnected from everything else, so there's not like a lot there, but we did some rubber chip work in the like Aletha Road, Helen Road neighborhood, so near sort of on near the towers. And that was one that we had talked when we did the rubber chip, the neighborhood was really upset about rubber chip because they were worried about the surface and the pieces coming up. And they did bring up at the fact at that particular time, there were 2 individuals living there who were both wheelchair bound. And because the sidewalks were in such poor condition, they had to go in the street, which obviously is not ideal. So I actually walk that neighborhood a lot and trying to deal with the neighbors, and there's not a lot of traffic on the street. So it would be a very simple street to do the systemic removal, knowing that it would be perfectly safe for somebody to cross from their house to the opposite side of the road. What I would say a pretty good indication in my mind of a good street for this is if you drive around town, you will see a lot of basketball hoops that are really in the right of way on the side of the road facing the street, which means the kids are playing basketball on the street. And I guess in my head, if the street is so quiet that kids feel comfortable playing basketball on the street, I'm not condoning that. They should not be playing basketball on the street. But if everyone feels like it's quiet enough for them to do that, crossing the street from their house to the opposite side of the street also seems like that would be reasonable. So Tyler can tell you the number of notices we had to put out this year when we were plowing, because those are particularly challenging for our plow drivers. But that would be like the type of street that I would think might be a good candidate for this.
I think the Blacksmith neighborhood as well, we've had lots of complaints over there, and we went over and evaluated it. It's a neighborhood that's got Blacksmith and all the side streets, sidewalks on both sides of the streets, but literally, like, the sidewalks are in disrepair on both sides of the street, so in order to get in there, and like, if you try to make one area safe, it's not like you could just make certain areas and do spot repairs for safety, it's like you need to go in there and do the entire thing, so that would be potentially a good candidate to look at to say, hey, let's remove. And that's a lot of the big issue we have, with especially with the asphalt sidewalks versus concrete panel sidewalks, concrete panel. Usually you just replace a few panels and that's it, but with asphalt sidewalks, especially with the tree roots and because we have such a backlog. we're not at the point where we could just go in there and do a spot repair at one address or just 10 feet at this house. It's literally, we get in there and we start looking at it, it's like, okay, where do we start? Where do we stop? It's,
Yeah, cul-de-sacs, developments that are, really. You have to go over a few streets before you hit a major collector. But that's the thing is like, you have to balance the candidates we think are good. The people that live on Blacksmith, they might not be on board with taking that.
So that's where Paul's suggestion, I think, has some merit, where if, as much as one can make it a kind of objective, systemic, or, systematic approach to grading or identifying what the criteria are, and then using those.
I think evaluating the criteria, and having the facts in front of you. Are really
Yeah.
important. I always get nervous when people start saying waiting, and you're gonna say, the telephone pole is worth, a wheelchair on one side of the street and the phone poles on the other is 0.7 and 0.5, and
Yeah.
that starts to get real hairy, but, yeah, I mean, the inventory kind of thing.
Yeah. So kind of the two directions does the neighborhood build a consensus, and that's how we determine, okay, once we've identified the neighborhood. Then we go in, we say which side, we kind of use more data-driven technical evaluation. Or do we do it the opposite way, where we identify, okay, this is a really good area. And then we actually go in and say, here's the deal, we take the deal or not, it's.
I don't
guess
like
one
the
sort of thinks
I-
both, I mean,
Oh.
the local feeling is certainly a really important thing, and that's where yeah, I mean, wheelchair access and stuff becomes very individualized and local at that point. It's certainly fair to have that on the table as well.
But I think that approach is a very risky one, just in terms of pitting neighbor against neighbor, and I would be wary of it.
Which one?
take it or leave it.
We'll do your street, but only if you agree to remove one side. I think having a systematic evaluation and approach, and then coming to them with a proposal, in my mind, makes more sense. I understand you want to, have a dialogue and make a deal. I think those deals are gonna be very hard to come by.
Well, so say we do that and we say this is this street we've determined through whatever process is a great candidate. Does there need to be just a certain number of, public forums? Is there another method by which because at the end of the day, it is a major change.
Yeah.
And people are gonna have opinions.
Mhm.
But. There's so many different ways you could do it, like, we have public neighborhood meetings, and there's gonna be people opposed and for, and then how do you adjudicate? Oh, I think most people wanted it or not, or, something more formalized than that, where, there's an actual form that's filled out or something, or a survey or something like that. So how, what level of involvement, and how is it sort of, how does the feedback get taken and turned into, okay, we're gonna do it or we're not?
One thought on that, I mean, I think it's extremely difficult, but when you all described the Webster Street project and the recent meetings, they weren't gonna change the design, but it could be tweaked by public comment. I mean, that's not great for the public, but I mean, these are very difficult decisions, and they should be as objective as possible, not just who can organize on a street better. I don't know. I think there are probably good candidate streets and better sides to actually do objectively. And that's the route I think should be taken. Maybe I'm naive, but I think having the deal approach, I personally am skeptical of.
To be clear, I'm not a advocating for any one
I
area to
understand.
do it.
It's an
That's
interesting
why we're
idea.
having the conversation.
Yeah, it's a very interesting, innovative idea. And maybe you could pilot it as opposed to make it your, main,
Well, I think it'll definitely start as a pilot one, regardless.
I did like the idea that you came up with, Paul, though, about having a scorecard that, or some kind of criteria when we go in there and we evaluate both sides and you rate them to determine like which side will be the candidate for removal versus which side will be the candidate. Because at least you would
I
have some.
think it would be interesting to combine that with an inventory, I guess if I were to think ideal world situation, right? I think. I wonder if we'd be surprised with. The distribution of. Streets that can be taken care of relatively easily versus. I think what. We often talk about, maybe what gets the most attention are the edge cases. Like the ADA or like the number of people that have wheelchairs, right? Like, I bet in a curve, right, those are probably in the tails, but I bet, I guess I would hypothesize that a bulk of the number of streets could be categorized and scored and sort of would fall within sort of like an easier set of streets to take care of.
Mhm.
And there will always be edge cases that are more complicated and more nuanced, and maybe those are the ones that require more dialogue with the town, but I think it'd be, once we get that data, I think it would be interesting to see, and then we rank like, okay, what is the cost to remove it? And what has historically been the cost to maintain it, and then you sort of have a ratio of what is the benefit to remove this versus how much it cost me in the past, and you can sort of then. You can come up with all sorts of ways to rank, sort of make, just like help you make decisions on what gets done, but. I would be very curious to take an inventory and be like, okay, actually, we've got a bunch of low-hanging fruit. Let's get at those first while we're done talking about ways to take care of the edge cases.
And we are starting to remove some sidewalk where it just makes sense, because some of it, to your point, is just a no-brainer. There's been a few, we've really. The flooding again has highlighted this for us. But there's been several streets where, because we're raising the sidewalk or building berms to help kind of contain that the
Mhm.
water. But then we're there and there's a sidewalk on the dead end street that goes all the way down to the dead end, but the home ends 100 feet before.
Yeah.
And we're going wide, so there's some obvious places where we're looking at saying, okay, those are obvious, we can pull that sidewalk out. And just loam and seed it and let it go, as opposed to keeping sidewalk there that we have to maintain. So there are some areas that we already know where we can do that. And we're putting it into the schedule to do that. I think we've already removed a couple different over the last 6 or 7 months that.
Yeah.
Probably even before your time as the director, but so there are some of those, but then. Like the key is really, okay, where do you, I think. Having the scorecard and the objective data, having the data to support, but really it's, okay, where do we pilot this first, and then where do we start?
Yeah.
And then how do we progressively work our way through the town to meet that end goal? Because we also have to look at things from an equitability standpoint.
Yep.
Because. We just put in sidewalk on Reservoir to get the housing authority up to GPAs, up to Central rather, but. So there's.
Yeah.
Some lenses that we have to look at this too, because we certainly don't want to come in and take away sidewalk and make things worse on the neighborhood, so.
I have one other broad suggestion to lay the groundwork of whatever approach you end up with, which is. You cited a statistic that I think the vast majority of residents have no idea of, that you have funding to do X miles. And yet there are 120 miles. And we recognize many are in very poor condition, but this is the reality. I mean, give the overall picture as background to get people thinking that, well, this really is a problem. And if if they're gonna make any headway, this idea of removing certain ones. Makes sense. It doesn't get over the local politics of it, but it does, if you will, soften the ground, so to speak. That people understand why their sidewalks aren't being fixed for a decade or more or whatever. And could be helpful down the road when such a process is initiated.
Yeah, it would be great if, I get a call, with that sort of comment. And I can say, well, there's this webpage that has a lot of information on it about how the sidewalks are maintained in town, what the challenges are. And, if you're interested in learning more about X pilot program or, program, then that's the place to go. That would be great. I currently don't really have a great answer when people say, when are you gonna get to my neighborhood? And
But the answer is, we have 120 miles. I have enough for, was it half a mile or whatever it
But
is?
even that funding there isn't really, now that we've sort of reached, eventually we will need to go back to the start of the list, but now that we've sort of reached the end of the school walking routes list. Anywhere we go is gonna be scrutinized
Right.
as, why did you choose to go there?
Right.
We have
So you
the
need
money.
additional criteria.
Yeah, we have the money that we have, and it can be like, okay, well. This area is not on the school walking route, but it's very close to points of interest or the school or the library or whatever else. So, and it's in really rough shape, so we'll go there. But that
Yeah.
might not be clear to someone else. There could be somebody that says like, oh, well, how did you decide that over my
Right.
my street? So that's why we wanna put together some, we have our own evaluation methods and sort of trying to get the best value for the taxpayer. But if it's too open-ended, then it leaves it open to a lot of mouths to feed, and we only have this small allocation that we can.
Just curious whether Shane or Clarice, or you have an idea, are there peers that come to mind in terms of other communities? And does a Newton or a Dedham or a Wellesley or something, how many miles of sidewalk do they have per road mile? How much are they spending on those systems?
Yeah,
Is that-
Newton's got roughly 420 miles of sidewalk. And so in Newton, it's their strategy is a little different, on roadways that if they're going to be milling and paving a roadway. They do soup to nuts, they do curb, sidewalk and mill pave. All once, they're getting less mileage, if you will, because that money doesn't, whereas with us, we're doing things a la carte, if you will. Because, and there's no right or wrong answer
I'm just kinda curious.
to how you do it, but Newton's approach when they do it is if they go mill and pave, they're doing all the sidewalks that need to be done, and that doesn't mean if they're doing 1.5 miles, doesn't mean 1.5 miles of sidewalk, but they're going through and marking all the panels that need to be replaced and replacing it as they need.
Is that more efficient?
You get it all done at the same time, but your dollar goes less than. For the roadway that you can get done, if that makes sense, because it's all the same
Yeah,
pot of
yeah.
money. So when you're combining that all into one, it's less mileage that you get done per year
Like if we're trying to hit that X number per year,
to maintain your PCI.
yeah,
Or your pavement condition index, your roadway rating, so it's really no. Right or wrong way, it's just the strategy of the approach.
Gross sidewalk miles per mile of road,
Yeah,
you know.
so Newton's got 600 and, I'm sorry, 620 lane miles, so they have 300 miles of. 310 miles of straight line roadway. And then I wanna say 400 miles of sidewalk. And that's because sidewalk on both sides of the street, can't just, so. But it's very difficult, because when I was the streets director in Newton, we had the exact same situation we had here where. I've literally had a backlog of over 5,000 service requests for sidewalk repairs. And we had the same thing where, we did a strategy where, and we did a lot of it in-house with our street maintenance staff, so we would just check those off, but it was same area, we'd get to, a home, and we would start that sidewalk, and then the neighbor would come out and say, hey, mine needs it too, and it's like, okay, what do we go ahead and do it? And if it's obvious, yes, we would do it. Cause otherwise, we say, no, James, you put your service request in this year, but Tim put his in 5 years ago, so we're doing Tim's. We'll see you in 6 years, so it's. Every community is struggling with this, that has sidewalks and maintaining the program, but there are several different ways. So I think the philosophy is if we can reduce the sidewalk mileage, and even if we reduced it by half. Then that reduces, or even a quarter of what we have now, that takes it down from 40 years to. Maybe 30 years or 25 and a half year backlog, so just anything to kind of reduce that maintenance and then, but. I do agree with James, it's gonna be a combination of trying to reduce sidewalk, but also potentially having to up the funding as well. But then it comes to Tyler's point is juggling all these balls because. You can see the amount of construction that's going on in the town right now, and construction season's just now kicking off.
Sure.
Cause school's not out, so when school gets out this week, you're gonna see it really, so it's also juggling. That so that not, we're not putting detour on top of detours because all this roadway work and utility work is competing with.
But the sidewalk
other.
reduction, in theory, could be as much as 25% or more is what you're thinking? Because
Well,
that's a big
don't know, we're just, I said that only because if we have a 40-year backlog
right.
and we reduced it by 50%. In theory, you only have a 20-year backlog now, so,
Right,
but we haven't, again, to Tyler's point, we're just. Kind of spitballing on.
right, so that.
We know it's better to reduce, but what amount should we reduce, where should we reduce, how should we go about it, that's all. What we're kind of looking for this committee to help with those decisions.
It starts with a pilot of some kind, it's just what is the structure of it?
But those first issues of what are the qualities of the street and neighborhood that lend themselves to one side versus two side sidewalks? I mean, I don't have any expertise in that. I assume you guys do at DPW or I don't know.
I think it's more intuitive than you would think, like I wouldn't discount your, like. If you have a horseshoe. Do you really need it on both sides,
Right.
right? If it's a cul-de-sac, if it's if there's a neighborhood that is sort of sandwiched between two. More major streets. It might not be as good of a candidate because you might have different populations going in different directions. It's hard to predict where the pedestrian activity is gonna be. But there are a lot of sort of development, that are built out as a development, as a sort of self-contained development. It might have one or two points of access that both empty out onto the same major road. Those are gonna be the areas that are the best candidates because you're able to travel throughout that development on one continuous pathway.
Yeah,
And
so you
it's
have
predictable.
criteria in mind, and I think applying them internally. Identifying what those neighborhoods, what those streets are, measuring the length and so forth, that'll give you a first crack
Yeah.
at.
And I
How
think that's
much
what
are
we're looking to do is we can make some recommendations, but having the committee. Take those recommendations and then voting on it to say, yes, this is, cause naturally, like I just jotted down here. Like the philosophy has been to keep, you naturally wanna have those sidewalks on potentially both sides of the streets where. Your centers are, so the heights, downtown. Schools,
Yeah.
around schools, potentially places of worship, transportation nodes. But then as you get beyond those 5 criteria of where you want the sidewalks to concentrate. To be at, because you want pedestrians to be able to get to those places.
Right,
Okay, what's your do you draw a circumference around now and say, okay, we're gonna go a quarter mile outside of that? And that's what so we don't know, and I'm just, again, I'm throwing that out, but that's like the criteria is where do we target? Do we say
Those are,
we don't target these areas, but if you're more than a half mile outside of this area, then that's a candidate for where we may wanna consider a
That-
pilot. I
that's
don't
where
know.
you're getting from. I mean, I kind of just to maybe build what Paul's got, I mean, you've mentioned a lot of, principles or factors. Like, the bus stops or the church.
Yeah.
Or whatever, and just getting those first in sort of bullet form and then actually deciding this is something that, yeah, you should regularly think about when you're doing it. And then maybe things like a quarter mile or half mile might occur in sort of going through those, but. I mean, yeah, there's a lot in terms of both on the cost side and the functionality side.
Yeah. It's, yeah, are there, I mean, in the dense neighborhoods, it seems to me you may need them on both sides, but in the spread out neighborhoods with very large lots and so forth. I don't know, if there are sidewalks on both sides in many of those neighborhoods. If they are, those seem to be candidates to me.
Yeah.
Is
I
there
think that
enough?
You're right.
Sidewalks that far away from all of those things to justify.
Yeah.
Having the solar program.
Yeah.
And are we at the point where it's just not enough to really move the needle?
Yes, we'd have to look, we have our sidewalks mapped.
Yeah, can you repeat what you just said?
Yeah, so if we're going like a half a mile from transit, a half a mile from schools. Shane was talking
What's
about
left?
making this, what's left on the outskirts, is it enough to move the needle
Yeah.
that it makes sense to like?
And again, that's just an idea of what
Yeah,
I'm saying,
sure,
like,
yeah.
I'm
But I
not
mean, that makes
suggesting that,
sense.
I'm just.
Right, it's a possible approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing about that, I have looked into like what some other peers have done, slightly more urban context, but they do like assign basically a score of they in any given location, they'll do like a quarter mile and then something will score higher if it has more points of interest or whatever. So that's kind of how they do that's their equivalent to how we've done it with school walking routes. And that part of the program, or that part of maintenance and the direction of sidewalk resources is kind of the part we have down, right? It's really the more marginal
Right.
residential areas that need this program, because if we're only looking at what scores highest, what is the closest highest pedestrian volumes, those areas will just never get serviced. It'll just never happen. So that's part of the reason why we need the program. So I think that it makes sense to want to prioritize, okay, what would be the best use of resources and what's closest to points of, all of that. But a lot of those areas are already being serviced by our existing program. So that's why it's so difficult to pick where to go, because you might be talking about a street that has very low pedestrian traffic. But the sidewalks are unsafe for whoever does live there. So it's
Yeah, I mean, you said earlier, safety trumps, and that's fine, that makes sense, you can't have unsafe stuff, but in those less dense neighborhoods. That have sidewalks on both sides, whether they're a quarter mile from these points of interest or half mile, I don't know, but some distance. Those are I mean, I would map those, measure them, and that would be a starting point, and
Is it enough?
I don't know if it's enough, I mean.
And that's kind of how we did, so when I took over the snow and ice program in Newton. Back in 2015, we'd taken a look, we approached it from the snow and ice standpoint, and. We looked at our snow and ice sidewalk climb maps, and they were just, quite frankly, ridiculous. We were plowing sidewalks, and it's like, why are we doing this?
Mhm.
And what came to find out is it was like Tim called and complained about a sidewalk
Right.
years ago, so his counselor called, and now we've plowed his sidewalk every year because his counselor called
Yeah.
one time. So we blew up the entire thing, and what we focused on is we put our map out, we had every school on there. And then we had the population data from the schools. So we put dots, different colored dots on the maps which represented the different age or
Mhm.
category school, elementary, middle school, high school. And then our focus was, we wanted to plow the sidewalks within a half mile of the
Mhm.
schools.
Mhm.
Transportation nodes, so that list I gave you earlier,
yeah.
we wanted to plow the sidewalks within a half mile of that. And then what we did is we pulled a committee together that composed, mayor's office. We had, Safe Route to School representative, and this kind of what Tyler talked about. The police, crossing guards, and then every year we would sit, we take those maps and look at them. And say, does this still make sense of how we're, because to Duncan's point, there were certain areas where. Like the Safe Route to School would say, we want this side plowed, but police and DPW would say. It doesn't make sense to plow that side, it makes sense to plow this side. Because this is a side that the kids are naturally coming to, so. There's nothing to say we couldn't kind of use. Potentially that same approach when it came to this, as well as using just some of that criteria to say, okay, to your point. Where do we want pedestrians and funneling the sidewalks that way to, cause if we're gonna remove sidewalk in an area, we wanna make sure that there's continuous sidewalk on one side of the street so that we're not putting people. Walking in the streets, so.
I mean, yeah, there's probably a family or set of streets that are small enough where it's really only, the question really is. Side A or side B.
Yeah.
And.
But then there's others like the
Right,
blacksmith
yeah.
neighborhood where you're like, okay, which one, both sides are candidates, but. So it's, but I think that, so the takeaway that I'm kind of hearing is that. Potentially what my suggestion would be to you, Mr. Chair, would be. Maybe we come back again, keep this on the agenda as a topic. We could come back with a map of our current sidewalk inventory, knowing that it's not. 100%, but at least we know where the sidewalks are. And then we can kind of visually see it. And then have that to start facilitating. Some of these conversations on, okay, what is the best approach?
Yeah.
And maybe,
And maybe even the scorecard, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but maybe even. Starting to focus on that. Criteria for building a scorecard or a score sheet out for. When we go out there to evaluate a neighborhood, assigning those scores, what that looks like, what criteria is gonna be on there, what those factors are. Cause I think that's a start.
and
That would be my
as,
suggestion.
as part of that early map, the cul-de-sacs that have it on two sides and the neighborhoods, you've already identified the blacksmith.
Yeah.
Neighborhood and so forth, highlight those and if you can, if you have the measurements of the distance of it, that's a start to find out whether there's enough there to move the needle, as you said, or not.
But that would be my suggestion, is that maybe this becomes a monthly topic and we can.
Yeah, I mean, we're not deciding it tonight.
Yeah, but I think having that map, maybe the next meeting, have the map, we certainly have the map, we can look at it, we know it's not perfect, but it's something. So we can look at that visually, and then maybe the next meeting I would suggest is maybe working on that scorecard as well, focusing on the efforts on. Building that scorecard or that evaluation sheet, but that's.
Yeah.
I
I'm
think-
not a voting member, that's just
Yeah.
something I'm kind of thinking about by listening to everybody's input.
I think talking about what can we do while the street design guide is getting scoped out and everything, this is something that I think we can kind of
Mhm.
focus. Time on,
Mhm.
because. There's, it's really more building something that. In the image that we think would be helpful, rather than kind of waiting for that data to come down and.
Yeah.
Having that influence our policy, so.
So Alex, I know you've been hearing us all night long. Is there anything you are thinking about as you've been listening to this conversations on? Like, are there anything from your perspective we may have missed in talking about these factors and what would go into this?
The only thing that's really crossing my mind is that our subdivision rules and regulations do require sidewalks on both sides of the streets. However, almost all of the new subdivisions are private ways. so I don't know that that is even relevant. And on most of them, they ask for a waiver of the requirement, which is granted. Because most of them are sort of function almost like driveways in a way, because it's so built out that they're usually like 2-lot subdivisions. So when we've got a bigger subdivision, which is rare, that's when that requirement is more, or less likely to be waived. But even still, I think since I've been here 17 years, which is crazy, I think that there's maybe been 1 or 2 subdivisions where the road has been accepted as a public way. So I don't know if that's even really relevant to this conversation, but I did want to note it. And
That's a good point, though, because if we did decide to remove sidewalk, then that may be a bylaw change. Or going to the planning board to amend,
Well, it's for new development.
but that's for new developments. What about existing?
so existing might have, there might be a approved subdivision plan that with a decision that had conditions to have 2 sidewalks. So,
So it's another
let me,
fact to think about.
it's another factor to think about, and I want to think about how I would even go about, everything was subdivided at some point, if you really think about it, but there's only certain, I can see when the subdivision rules and regulations came into play, for one thing. I don't know that it makes sense to go back and do all this research. I want to think about it and think about how this should play a role. So maybe I can come back to the next meeting with my thoughts in order a little bit more about it, but that's sort of, I've been hemming and hawing about that over here.
No, that's good though, because we definitely, something to think about, because we definitely don't want to make any decisions that go against any planning decisions or requirements. And then be in violation of requirements, so, or bylaws.
Yeah, well, we're not going into any private ways, that's for sure.
Right.
And removing them doesn't help you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so, I think this, I just wanted to bring it up so that we could get the conversation started and.
Yeah.
We'll continue, with a map and an update from Alex next time. Next month, we're meeting with Tyler,
Travis. Yes, July. We have to determine if we still want to meet it at our normal time of the month, because it's right around the holiday. Cause it's,
Yeah, it would be,
First Monday,
It'll be July 8th,
second Monday, really.
so it's not quite the holiday weekend.
Yeah.
But
It's right afterwards.
I'll be on vacation that week.
You be on vacation? I don't need you.
be here.
You will or
I
what?
won't be here.
Okay.
I can probably make it, but any other,
The community members are what matters, cause you guys. For the forum.
yeah.
I mean, I'm here then, but I'm also, I value everyone's, input and participation. If we could find a day when everybody could be here, that'd be ideal, but anyway, I'm available on the 8th
Do
also.
a doodle or find out what Travis's availability is, maybe, then.
Yeah, I think Travis. Yeah, it'll be more coordinating all of your schedules.
Maybe we do a doodle poll.
That's what he just said.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, who's gonna do that?
I will do it.
Oh, okay.
Don't worry.
No, I'm just making sure that we have someone that.
Action items.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and to be realistic, probably you're not gonna find a date for everybody, so maybe.
Yeah, I would, it would be great if, Mo could be here since he wasn't here today. Yep, Justin.
I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Okay, take a vote, James?
yes, yeah.
Duncan? Yes. Paul?
Yes.
Chair votes aye. Adjourned. Meeting adjourned.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Good conversation.
It's supposed to be quick,
night.
isn't it? It was like gonna be up to an hour. It's like, oh my.
Nothing's easy, right?